Hello there, everybody, and I want to say a very, very warm welcome to you. I'm Jayney Goddard, President of the Complementary Medical Association, which I'm sure you probably know by now as the world's largest and best known and actually longest established professional membership association for incredibly highly qualified complementary medical practitioners. Training schools and colleges of excellence, and also, of course, we represent clinics, spas, retreats, and Complementary Medical Association approved suppliers. Those companies that go above and beyond to provide goods and services to the profession that are beyond outstanding. So today I wanted to introduce you to Dr. Frank Sabatino. We did an interview with him. You'll be able to look back at that, and we'll provide a link for you just now. But Frank and I have been having quite intense discussions about the COVID-19 challenge. I don't want to call it the COVID-19 crisis because, you know, we don't like to use alarmist thinking and alarmist words, but, you know, this is legitimately a challenge for all of us. And something that keeps coming up is the question of how do we strengthen our immune systems? Should we be doing anything on the supplementation front? A lot of people keep saying, oh yes, well, you know, we need to be able to get outside and get vitamin D. And of course, most of us know that vitamin D plays a huge role in modulating our immune status and actually helping to prevent viruses from being able to take hold and be totally devastating to us. So there's obviously a lot more to it than that. And so, of course, Dr. Sabatino is one of the world's leading experts in the natural health field. So I wanted to turn it over to you, Frank, if I may, at this point, and just get you to perhaps introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about your work, and then perhaps you can comment a little bit about what your thoughts are around D and other forms of supplementation.
Yeah, hi, I'd like to welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Frank Sabatino. I'm the health director of the Balance for Life Health Retreat in Deerfield Beach, Florida, which is a plant-based retreat center where people come for a few days or for extended periods of time to experience plant-based eating, living. We also do juice and water fasting programs. So it's a full in-residence program to help people recover their health. I also have had a unique background in the fields of cell biology, neurobiology, and my own research training. So today I wanted to get into a little bit more of the evidence base of a very simple hygienic component of life, which of course we all know, which is sunshine. And we're hearing a lot about the impact of vitamin D, and people always talk about vitamin D supplementation. But it has actually it has a unique connection to what we're really dealing with currently.
Frank, can I stop you there and just, sorry to butt in. When you use the word hygienic, or hygienic as we would pronounce it here in the UK, now we're all being told to wash our hands constantly, which of course is brilliant advice. But does that relate in any way to the way that you're using the word hygiene?
Well, I'm using it a little bit more expansively because there was a movement within the United States for many years called the American Natural Hygiene Movement. And it does sound like just sanitary procedures, but the hygienic movement, which was really set in motion by a very famous doctor, Dr. Herbert Shelton, talked about what are the true biological requisites of health? What are those things that support life under all conditions? So we know food, rest, sunshine, activity, emotional poise. So he coined the word natural hygiene as an umbrella term to encompass all of those basic biological requirements. So when I talk about sunshine today in that respect, I'm talking about it as a fundamental biological requirement beyond just sanitary procedures.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, because I know it's one of those questions that is often asked, so I do appreciate that. So sorry, I butted in, and you were talking about the role.
Well, I think to understand this, we have to have a very simple, basic understanding, and I don't want to belabor it, for how the body produces vitamin D. And I think it's essential because we're going to see, for me, some real magical connections between that process and how the immune system actually processes and interprets that too. So for example, in our skin, we have a form of cholesterol that when the sun hits it, it converts it in the deeper layers of the skin into something called vitamin D3. That vitamin D3 is then shunted to fat cells, because vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, where it could be stored, or sent to the liver, where the process of activating it is set in motion. So under certain enzymes, the liver will produce what's called 25-hydroxy vitamin D. And then under another set of enzymes, the kidney will produce the active form called calcitriol. So that process from sun to skin to fat cells to liver to kidney creates the incredibly active form of vitamin D. And intriguingly, there are receptors, proteins on cells in the brain, in the heart, in the immune system, on cells in the immune system that are designed to receive that vitamin D. So we now know that there are a number of problems and systems that are directly affected by the presence of vitamin D. So for example, we know when vitamin D is deficient, there's more mortality from heart disease, for example. We know when vitamin D is deficient, there is greater risk for certain forms of cancer. We now also know that there are receptors for vitamin D, which I find remarkably interesting, on the white blood cells that are part of the immune system. And so in the immune system, for example, we know that there are two classes of cells. One are called T cells and one are called B cells. Both of these are forms of white blood cells. T cells actually will destroy infected cells. So if a cell, like right now, gets infected by the coronavirus, the T cells produced by our immune system will seek out those cells and destroy them. It's a seek and destroy mission. So we have what are called T killer cells, T helper cells. Now, what's interesting, the other part of immunity is you have what are called B cells. So not only can one class of white cells destroy infected cells, but the B cells will come along now and recognize the protein in these foreign invaders and actually create an antibody against it. So in a future exposure to this virus or pathogen or something from the outside, the body now has built up this population of cells that are on the job, able to respond and fight it because they've already been programmed to recognize it.
All part of our acquired immune system.
Right, so that whole adaptive immune response takes place basically through these two classes of white blood cells. Mm-hmm. What's intriguing for me is that there is a huge body of epidemiological science that suggests that the status, your vitamin D status, is linked to a wide range of autoimmune and inflammatory disorders, even things like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and even type 1 diabetes,
yes,
insulin-dependent diabetes. So that begs the question, why would vitamin D status be directly related to our own immune response, and how does that actually take place? Well, without citing individual papers, I'm going to sum up a number of papers here because this is a strong evidence base. They've discovered receptors for vitamin D on those classes of immune cells, on literally the white blood cells, the T cells, the B cells. And so then you have to say, well, why would those cells have those particular receptors? Well, if you go back to what we discussed at the beginning, we made the point that the kidney activates vitamin D from the precursor in the liver. The liver will provide this. There's an enzymatic transformation of the active form of vitamin D. We now know that the white blood cells of the immune system, like the kidney, can produce the calcitriol, the active form of vitamin D, directly. So that's a remarkable observation. And we see that there's an endless array of these vitamin D receptors throughout the immune system on all of those white T cells and B cells, and that these cells can respond to the precursor vitamin D and actually produce the active form of vitamin D. And we're now finding that the active form of vitamin D plays a major role in our immune and inflammatory response, so that deficiencies of vitamin D now will compromise how those T cells can fight infection, how those B cells can produce antibodies. And we're seeing now that anything that can promote a healthy level of vitamin D will have a direct effect on the major active cells of the immune system. So this is not just some nebulous kind of connection. This is a hardcore cellular connection in the wisdom of the body, creating the active forms of vitamin D for protection against invaders, pathogens, infection, and modulating, regulating our own inflammatory response. I find that remarkable.
It is absolutely outstanding, isn't it? And thank you so much for looking at that work for us. What I tend to find quite useful when I'm talking to people about receptors on cells is to get people to conceptualize a lock and a key. So
Exactly.
the receptor is like the lock, and the lock is always open. And of course, just as any normal door lock would be, it has a specific sort of little set of tumblers inside that are the exact shape and size waiting for that particular individual key. In this case, we're talking about a vitamin D molecule. So yes, if people want to conceptualize that, the idea.
So let's make it practical for right now. Mm-hmm. So what that means now is that while we're dealing with social distancing and locking and hunkering ourselves down in our homes, it becomes incredibly important to realize that even a modest amount of sun exposure every single day has a major impact on potentially improving our ability to fight this ongoing infection, to activate those T cells that will get rid of infected cells, and to activate our B cells to produce antibodies against the coronavirus for the future, for future exposure. We lose sight of how powerful this human body is in dealing with the organisms and things we've been exposed to in the environment. We've been adapting to these organisms and creatures since the beginning of our inception. So the bottom line is the body has this incredible ability to recognize what's not a normal part of itself, to create the conditions that will protect it against what's not us, so that we can stabilize ourselves. But here's a direct, important connection between sun exposure, getting a good 10 minutes of sun exposure. It's the most natural, healthy form of vitamin D to start the process. But now we can see that it has a direct impact on the body's ability to fight infection.
Now, I would always absolutely 100% agree with you about that. And it's certainly something that I teach wherever I can. But to play devil's advocate, here in the UK, for example, at the moment, we are only allowed out for exercise for 1 hour a day. Now, we have been blessed with the most outstandingly lovely weather here on the south coast of England, but it's very, very cold and the wind is bitter. In fact, it's been taking it well below freezing point. When you factor in the wind chill factor there. So you aren't really going to go out with the best will in the world in your shorts and your t-shirt. I've been going out and doing my exercise, but I do have to wrap up until I get warm enough to be able to start taking layers off. Even so, I'll still keep my gloves on and probably try to remain relatively covered up just because of that biting wind. So obviously we know that as the weather warms up, we're going to be able to get out and hopefully still get out for an hour a day. But those of us here in Northern Europe, and I appreciate you're down in sunny South Florida, but here in Northern Europe, we can't really get out to get sufficient amounts of D into our bodies. So what do you suggest that we actually do?
Well, here's the interesting thing. We know, and I agree with you, I'm in a climate here in South Florida where we're inundated with accessible sun. The point, in fact, is you only need about 10 minutes of sun exposure on exposed hands and face to really trigger this kind of process of vitamin D production. Bottom line, though, is, again, we do know that people that, for example, are overweight, if you are obese, that pathway where vitamin D3 is produced by the liver into 25-hydroxy vitamin D, that vitamin D3, if it gets shunted to fat cells, could actually block the availability for activation. So we know now that people that are overweight or overfat can have vitamin D deficiencies. We know people with darker skin, where there's more melanin, can actually block sun absorption, which can affect vitamin D levels. So again, there are factors, and we know the final activation of vitamin D takes place in the kidney. So if you have kidney problems or problems with kidney circulation and function, you may have, again, some compromise of vitamin D levels. So there can be deficiencies that occur. We don't need a lot of sun exposure. You can measure vitamin D, and I measure vitamin D on all blood tests. We do something called 25-hydroxy vitamin D. That's the form that the liver produces. That's the precursor to the final activated form in the kidney. So by measuring that, you can measure if there was enough vitamin D3 from sun exposure to produce it, and you can also see if the body's making enough. But let's face it, right now, no one's running out to do vitamin D blood tests.
No.
So the bottom line is, if there's, and the range that's usually acceptable on these blood tests is they really operate at a low end. I like to operate at a much higher level in the traditional blood test. We don't need to get into all the numbers, but normally labs will measure it between like 20 and 100 nanograms per milliliter. And most doctors will be happy if you're anywhere from 20 to 30. And they actually talk about a vitamin D deficiency being less than 12. Frankly, I like to see the vitamin D level about mid-range, closer to 40 to 50. But here's the key. If we know that vitamin D typically occurs in foods that are more oily and animal-based, problem is those foods have so much risk that we can't condone eating them for vitamin D intake. Vitamin D will also be in a number of fortified grains and non-dairy products like non-dairy milks and things. So they can come in that form, or it can be supplemented. And so there are many people who feel that vegans, for example, are people that really need to be concerned because they're not taking in any of those animal products. They may be eating some of the fortified products. But I think many people will recommend in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 international units of vitamin D3 as a supplement. The number of 4,000 has been set now kind of as a safe limit for the day. So anything above that may have some toxic implications. Why? Because vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, goes into the liver, it could create some liver toxicity. So if there was any doubt and you live in a northern climate and you wanted a supplement and you weren't in a position to do a 25-hydroxy vitamin D blood test, I would probably recommend about 1,000 to 2,000 international units a day of vitamin D3. But still, the most accessible and gentle form is to get about 10 minutes of soft sun exposure several times a week. And even if it's on face and hands, and this means without sunscreen, sunscreen will block will block the ability of the body to produce vitamin D. So you could take a supplement. We're recommending some very gentle sunlight. And at this point, even if you're living in England or Northern Europe and you can get out and even get 10 minutes on face and hands, I would still recommend that.
Yes, I think it makes complete sense to do so. I think it's so fascinating about the various people the categories or the cohorts of people who may have problems processing D. For example, people who are carrying more body fat and people who have greater levels of melanin in their skin. Now, in that case, if they have the double whammy of also being in Northern Europe and it being cold and you can't really go outside at the moment, then really I would imagine that those are the people who, and I certainly would recommend that they supplement just to
well, you know, it's funny. I live in Florida and I have people come in with the tannest skin. So you think they're going to have the most sun exposure. In fact, they're so tan, they look like, walking luggage. The skin has been so damaged. They look like Gucci bags. And even some of those people have vitamin D deficiency. So you can't always tell by looking at skin color. That's why I tend to do a blood test to check it. And anytime anyone does blood work, it's an easy thing to do routinely on any blood exam. But in the people you described, I would probably recommend a couple of 1,000 international units on a daily basis just to play it safe, because we know that when vitamin D gets low, not only can it compromise immunity, it can compromise bone health. It can compromise heart health. It can actually increase systemic pain in the body, vitamin D levels. And that can be something that shows up with autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, for example. So the bottom line is this whole issue of autoimmunity and vitamin D depression is really an interesting connection. And we also know that when vitamin D goes lower, the body tends to produce serotonin less. So there's some relationship between vitamin D deficiency and even depression and seasonal affective disorders where people are not getting that sun exposure. So there's so many correlations with vitamin D, but the one today that we were focusing on with immunity is really such a profound, incredible picture of cell biology and immunology and how this immune system is directly affected by vitamin D levels.
Absolutely, yes. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And I know that our viewers will be hanging on your every word, because I think that the piece of the puzzle that you've brought to this conversation is something that's really overlooked, and very much overlooked in the field of conventional medicine. I think actually most doctors, unless they, well, I would say probably most GPs would not be aware of this, and unless somebody's really specifically working in the field of immunology, then they will tend not to be at the front line working with patients anyway. So I think you are representing a piece of the puzzle that most people would never even get to learn about in any way.
And
so,
people need to realize this is not a small evidence base. This is a huge evidence base. The epidemiology of this is strong, and this shows up on cells, studies in cells and tissue culture, animal models, human models. So this relationship of sunlight, vitamin D, and the ability of the immune system to fight infection, let's stay right with that little soundbite, is a huge piece. So do not underestimate that. Get a little bit of sunlight even now while you're hunkering down. Just 10 minutes a day, get out, take a nice walk, get a little sun exposure on whatever body parts you can expose, and you know that you're taking a major, major role in helping your immune system fight this ongoing current infection.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much again, Frank. Dr. Frank Sabatino, everybody, just being an absolute superstar as always. Thank you, Frank. Please bid everybody goodbye.
Thank you, Jayney. Thank you so much.